It's the industry that laid the foundation for our nation's growth and prosperity. Its products played a central role in the development of transportation, construction, defense, and contributed to America's economic independence. For nearly 2.5 centuries, iron manufacturing ruled in Pennsylvania and formed the backbone of our industrial revolution. Today's modern steel industry evolved from furnaces like the extraordinary one named Cornwall, where iron was once king. From its beginning as a colony in 1681, Pennsylvania has always had a rich agricultural legacy. Many hard-working immigrants settled in the Lebanon Valley, where the farmland was lush and bountiful. Some of them thought they saw in the mountains and streams a replica of their homeland. It was, however, another landmark that changed the dynamics of the valley forever. A writer to the Philadelphia Inquirer centuries later stated the case well.
Rich as have been its thousands of smiling acres, and large as were its harvests, the biggest single event in Lebanon's annals was the discovery of 3 green hills. Big Hill, Middle Hill, and Grassy Hill comprised what for a century was the world's greatest iron mine.
The exact time of the discovery and the person who found the hills will probably never be known. It was Peter Grubb, however, who first developed and profitably used their valuable ore. Iron ore is a rock in the earth which contains the metal iron. When it's heated, metal is extracted from the rock to make pig iron, an essential component of steel. After a successful apprenticeship as a stonemason, Peter Grubb embarked on a new career as an iron master. By 1739, he was well on his way. Grubb accumulated over 1,000 acres of property, including the ore-rich hills, where he started mining operations. He also completed a deal for construction of a blast furnace, a massive stone structure where iron is smelted from iron ore. Peter called it Cornwall in honor of his ancestral home in England. Cornwall Furnace was perfectly situated to become one of the country's most productive ironworks. Besides its close proximity to the hills, Cornwall bordered dense, sprawling forests, an important source of charcoal used in the iron-making process. Limestone, which separates metal from ore, surrounded the furnace. And the valley's abundant rivers and streams provided water power. By 1742, Cornwall was up and running. In 1776, the War of Independence between Great Britain and America's 13 colonies elevated the iron industry to greater importance. Peter Grubb's sons, who inherited Cornwall Furnace following their father's passing, vigorously supported the Patriots' cause. When George Washington's troops requested iron, they were ready, casting 42 cannon and more than 86 tons of shot for the Continental Army. After the war, the Cornwall property began to leave the hands of the Grubb family because of increasingly strained relations between the brothers. By 1798, Robert Coleman gained control of the furnace operation, the first of 4 generations of Colemans who would oversee Cornwall. Robert Coleman was born in Ireland in 1748. At age 16, he followed his brother's lead and emigrated to America, where opportunities for economic success were boundless for many. Coleman acquired a forge near Philadelphia and immediately made a hefty income by manufacturing cannonballs and shot. With his sizable wartime revenues, he bought other forges and furnaces, including Cornwall. By the age of 55, Robert Coleman's wise investments allowed him to build an iron dynasty and become one of Pennsylvania's first millionaires. The strength and endurance of his workers took the industry to new heights and laid the foundation for our nation's steel industry. The iron plantation at Cornwall Furnace grew steadily in size to almost 10,000 acres. There were farms, villages, schools, churches, and shops. Economically, it was nearly self-sufficient. The workforce living in the community was an interesting, diverse lot, led by Robert Coleman. As ironmaster, he possessed technical wisdom as well as business expertise. His clerk, the second in command, assisted Coleman, purchased supplies, kept records, paid bills, and oversaw the company store.
Have a good day.
The most skilled worker employed at the furnace was the founder, who was in charge of iron production. It was his responsibility to blend ore and fuel based on experience, since there was no scientific way of measuring the ingredients. The founder received the highest pay among iron workers, with a salary based on tonnage of iron produced. The wages of others varied greatly, depending on the skill required for the job. Molders were among the best paid. They poured the molten iron into flasks to produce castings, and ladled the hot iron into carefully prepared molds to cast items like stove plates and frying pans. Guttermen prepared the casting floor and directed the remaining molten iron into troughs. This iron became known as pig iron. The pig iron required further refinement at a nearby forge, and then at a blacksmith's to create goods like horseshoes, hinges, and tools. Men didn't monopolize all the important activities on the plantation. While there were no records to show that women helped in iron making, many did work in the fields, besides carrying out their duties in the home. Homes for the workers were constructed along roads which crossed the plantation in villages named Goosetown, Miners Village, and Dutchtown. The houses were small, consisting of 2 rooms on the ground floor with a loft above. Since most of the wages of the workers were spent for the bare necessities of life, few, if any, fine furnishings would be found in their homes. The best-known residence on the plantation was the ironmaster's mansion, a large estate with servants and gardeners, much like English gentry. Built originally by Peter Grubb's sons, it underwent frequent renovations during the Coleman dynasty. In a letter to the Norristown Herald, a writer named J.F. recounts his visit.
We left Lebanon at 9 o'clock and rode over to Cornwall Furnace. Stopping at the mansion, we were welcomed and entertained in old-fashioned, gentlemanly style of true hospitality. To look through the mansion, with its gardens, arbors, fish ponds, and summer houses, is calculated to create in the minds of those aspiring to splendor a feeling of discontent with their lot.
For the owners and managers, there were parties and dances to go to, and fox hunts and horse races to attend. The pleasures of the ironworkers were apt to be far simpler. Theirs was a life characterized by hard labor, with only a few breaks in the tedium of work. Despite the major disparity in lifestyles, ironworkers were treated well.
Good morning, boys and girls.
The Coleman family brought teachers and preachers to their employees, erected churches, and handed out turkeys at Christmas. Life was far different for colliers, however, who were often regarded as hermits. It was their job to watch over the charcoal piles in the forest and produce charcoal for the furnace. From the time the first pit was fired in the spring until the last piece of charcoal was hauled out in the fall, colliers lived in the woods, constantly caring for several hearths at once. Home was a crude hut, covered over with dirt and leaves, and furnished only with a wood stove and log bunks. Colliers relied heavily on woodcutters for their timber. Perhaps the most legendary cutter was an African-American slave named Governor Dick, who lived in a shed at the foot of the hill. For a while, the mound was called Governor Dick's Hill, but has since been simply referred to as Governor Dick. In 1825, Robert Coleman passed away at the age of 77. His Cornwall properties were willed to his 4 surviving sons, who took the iron industry to staggering new heights. Over the next 2 decades, the furnace produced pig iron at a consistently high level, with production exceeding 1,000 tons each year. It was in some ways the golden age of Cornwall Iron Furnace. With canals and then railroads crossing Pennsylvania, Cornwall iron traveled even farther afield. In a little more than a century, Lebanon had grown from an agricultural village into a thriving industrial town. The 20 years which preceded the Civil War were, for Lebanon County, remarkable. For the residents of the area, the 1840s and 50s were grand and glorious decades. Despite the industrial boom for the county and the nation, revolutionary changes in the iron industry began to lessen the importance of Cornwall Furnace during the second half of the 19th century. Anthracite coal was introduced for fuel, and a hot blast process replaced the old cold blast method. The newer furnaces were much bigger and could process iron ore more efficiently. By 1874, the Coleman family was losing money at Cornwall Furnace. Competition from anthracite furnaces, many of them owned by the Colemans themselves, increased. Although Cornwall continued functioning, its post-Civil War operations were not as extensive, nor as important to the region as they had been. On February 11, 1883, operations at Cornwall Iron Furnace ceased, ending 141 years of continuous production. In 1932, the great-granddaughter of Robert Coleman presented the furnace property to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a museum. Bethlehem Steel continued mining the Cornwall ore deposit in the 20th century. And in 1973, mining at its ore-rich hills came to an end. It was the material of the industrial age, bringing mankind into the wonders of a modern era. For more than 100 years, its strength and flexibility flourished in Lebanon County, allowing us to build objects that were never dreamed possible before its development. The iron and later steel industries supplied the materials to propel our nation's growth to spectacular heights. Today, in the 21st century, it's the historical integrity of the remaining physical structures at Cornwall Iron Furnace Plantation that link us to an understanding of the realities of life in an industrial community in 18th and 19th century America. The architecture and aesthetic characteristics of Cornwall reflect commitment, investment, and pride of ownership continuously from the Grubbs and the Colemans to the current residents of the Commonwealth today. It is the place where iron was once king.